Africa is a continent that's often lumped together as a single mass of genocide, abject poverty, and disease. The reality of it, though, as gruesome as it may seem, is actually far from bleak. And so even though I might look white or white passing, I'm actually mixed race, which means that I tend to spend a lot of time skipping between Europe and Africa. And the truth is that Africa has a lot of potential. I've been to South Africa, Kenya, Rwanda, DRC, Tanzania, and my experience gave me insight to connect dots that nobody else sees. And so in this video, I want to explain to the uneducated the real reasons why Africa is the way it is, the historical reasons, and then I want to make a follow-up video explaining why there's actually a lot of hope for the continent. To talk about Africa is often to talk about some of the harshest living conditions anyone in the world can experience. But what most people don't really want to address is the real root cause for these problems. And so obviously the first thing that comes to mind is colonialism. Colonialism is a very broad problem which requires a lot of historical depth to tackle, though some of its effects will still be tackled here. And so a more poignant and relevant side of colonialism that will be discussed here is neocolonialism, or how exterior powers still manage to plunder Africa for its resources almost a century after the end of colonialism. And so there's many examples of this. France with the CFA and Françafrique, Russian security for resources, the Chinese debt traps, and it's often understated just how hard it is for a good African leader to rise up when so many interests are poised against the continent. And so take the example of John Magufuli in Tanzania, who died shortly after cracking down on a Canadian mining operation evading taxes and trying to build a gold refinery within Tanzania itself. So there's the geopolitical problem, but now I really want to talk about the cultural side of why Africa is so dysfunctional. The first one that really comes to mind when you come to Africa and work with Africans is the problem of time management. So this is a problem that's explained in detail by John Mbiti, who was a Kenyan philosopher, when he explains that traditionally Bantu languages, which incorporates most languages in Africa, only accommodate for the present and past tense, whereas the future tense doesn't really exist. So in Mbiti's thesis, he explains that both the present and the near future really belong to the same time category, which is called the Sasa, whereas the long past is called the Zamani. Now, oftentimes, Mbiti's thesis is misinterpreted to say that Africans have no sense of planning. And although it can feel that way, the reality is that the traditional pre-modern African society functioned according to a very harmonious rhythm. The Sasa, so the present, was informed by the past, so the Zamani, that birthdays had to be celebrated, fields sown, etc. Until the traditional structure was dismantled by modernity, which was brought by the Europeans, forcing them to live in accordance to a completely different lifestyle which did not function according to this regular rhythm of life. And so the African man was forced outside of his traditional lifestyle and into cities, forced to plan often not for a future guaranteed by the past, but for a completely new one that was often pretty much abstract to them. Planning to build something he's never seen in his life, with numbers of a budget that goes down as things get built. You get the point. These are things that only exist on a sheet of paper, but which he has never seen. So here's a story to illustrate this point. Though it's not necessarily the most accurate, but it'll give you a sense of what I'm trying to talk about. A lot of the foreigners who come to Africa often have this experience where they'll employ villagers for construction work, but then oftentimes find themselves at a complete loss for words when the villagers just seemingly show up at random in the morning for the project. And so they ask themselves, why is this? Why do they come randomly? Why don't they come on time? And the reason why is that during those days, back in the 50s up until around the 90s, their way of calculating time was just by looking at the vague position of the sun in the sky. But I assure you, nowadays, this problem is much less widespread thanks to the arrival of the cell phone. And so this shows the complete contrast in trying to organize a traditional society within a modern framework. And so to use a historical comparison, this isn't too different to when Europeans had to put clocks in their own factories because people working in the factories cannot tell the time and when they have to get off if they can't see the sun in the sky because they're working in a factory. And so I hope that this example illustrates that this is mainly a sociological problem of trying to adapt the people to a new era. Then there's the general problem of ethnic fragmentation throughout African nations, which itself actually comprises a double issue. One of top-down, of the politics of the belly, in which whoever is able to capture the power within a state institution will actually just use their power to extract resources and feed themselves, their family, political allies, their ethnic group, etc. Then there's the bottom-up issue of trust. Because of the inherent distrust between ethnic communities, so this mentality of me and my people versus those guys over there means that you basically don't trust the government if your people isn't the one controlling it. You don't trust public goods since they're also going to the other groups. And eventually you vote along ethnic lines instead of good politics, etc. And so I leave it to you why this ends up becoming a massive problem. I mean, just look at Belgium, now imagine how it is in Africa. But this is largely the fault of European colonizers for lumping a ton of these different ethnic groups into big colonial governships and then defaulting to those borders when the time for decolonization came. And then this last problem I'm going to talk about, which I'm sure a lot of my African viewers will relate to, is the problem of the African family ethic, where if one person succeeds, suddenly your third removed cousin starts texting you on WhatsApp asking for money. Now, this is talked about popularly and joked about quite a lot, but this is an actual problem. Individual investment becomes irrational since all gains you might be able to make will be distributed anyway, so what's the point? And the problem therefore is that this kills capital formation and entrepreneurship. While this isn't unique to Africa, since this also happens in high solidarity cultures like in Southeast Asia, this is a problem here. And while all of this might seem very daunting for the continent, a lot of these problems are slowly fading away as time goes on. And in the follow-up to this video, I want to show you how Africa is actually going to break free from a lot of these constraints. And so I believe there's a lot to learn on how the continent will be progressing past a lot of these different problems, which is good not just for Africa, but also for you if you actually pay attention and grab at the opportunity when it starts coming full swing. And I believe there's opportunities for those willing to not look past these problems, but have the patience to actually wait them out. But hey, I think I've spoiled too much about that video, so I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.